Hey, hello everybody. Over here at Norfolk State University, the Norfolk State University, and I'm about to attend an event that is partly sponsored by the Portsmouth Museums, Arts and Cultural Center, or the Portsmouth Museums Department, and in conjunction with Norfolk State University. And they're going to have a discussion or a talk by Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexander and Dr. Charles Ford, who are professors here at Norfolk State University. And they will be talking about voting rights in the 20th century. Voting rights in the 20th century. So I expect this to be a very informative conversation between the two professors. And I'm sure students will be in there and they will have the question and answer afterwards. But anyway, get ready to go in this rain because I think it's very important that I attend as a member of the Museum and Fine Arts Commission in the city of Portsmouth to try to attend as many of the events that they sponsor as I can. So I can be informed as a member of that commission. So I'm looking forward to it, and it's always great to be here on the beautiful campus of Norfolk State University. So the next time you'll see this video in action, it will be in progress with Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexandra. Take care. We'll see you in there.
Now 2026 lecture series. Black History Now is a City of Portsmouth program that started in 2016 with the intention of highlighting African American voices, stories, and histories that define Portsmouth and Hampton Roads, but have too often been neglected or underrepresented in classrooms, textbooks, or popular media. We've been able to highlight these stories, scholars, and community members over the years by expanding Black History Now. Instead of only celebrating Black history for 1 month each February, we celebrate throughout the year with lectures, programs, and exhibits. Today, I would like to welcome our speakers, Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexander and Dr. Charles Ford, both professors of history here at Norfolk State University, to present their lecture, Voting Rights in the 20th Century America. I'd like to thank Dr. Newby Alexander and Dr. Ford for all their help coordinating and presenting our first Black History Now lecture outside of the city of Portsmouth. And we hope that this will be just the beginning of many future presentations in Norfolk and in Hampton Roads as part of the series. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexander and Dr. Charles Ford.
Entire archive of materials telling you of all the men who served. How many of you know that at the final battle of the American Revolution, one-fourth of the troops on both sides were black men? Both sides. And you've never seen that depicted. Never seen that mentioned. No images, no drawings, no paintings, no nothing. Because if you erase a person's participation, you say they are not worthy enough to be a citizen and worthy enough to have voting rights. And so Ralph Ellison asked an important question. What would America be like without black people? So, you know, when you're traveling and you need your GPS, there was a black woman who was responsible for inventing it. If you are thinking about refrigeration, even something like a traffic light, railroad cars, safety circuits, so on and on and on. You thank black people for it. Those are just a few things. But also, every single war, every single battle that America's been involved in has included black people. And we've had so many from this area who have transformed the nation. We had a couple who escaped from Norfolk in 1842, George and Rebecca Latimer, and they had 4 children. Their youngest one was named Lewis Latimer. He's the one who invented the filament to the incandescent light bulb that made Thomas Edison's invention work. He worked with Alexander Graham Bell to help the telephone to work. He worked with every major inventor and draftsman here in this country as well as in Europe. And yet most people do not know his name. He has many patents that he got from his inventions, and yet nobody knows his name. That is how you erase a group of people, a whole race of people. That's an example. We had Mary LeVest, who was her husband and another man in the Gosford Navy shipyard copied the plans to the CSS Virginia. That was their version of an ironclad vessel, and it was Mary LeVest who got those plans to Edward Stanton, Secretary of War, and as a result, they sped up the production of the USS Monitor. Now imagine this little woman, she was a short little woman, free black woman. She went to St. Patrick's Church, which became St. Mary's Church here in Norfolk. And during the Civil War, she managed to make her way up to Washington, D.C. and demanded to see the Secretary of War, and they let her see him. That's why I said be scary of little women. You all didn't even laugh hardly. Come on now. All right, so Ralph Ellison said the nation could not survive being deprived of their presence, meaning black people's presence. Can you think of anything that, in terms of our culture, music, art, literature, that has impacted the world that came from black people? Rock and roll. Oh, you all are pitiful. Come on. Rap music? That came from Africa. What? Thank you, music period. That includes country music.
Banjo.
Yes. Okay, so all right. By the irony implicit in the dynamics of American democracy, they symbolize both its most stringent testing and the possibility of its greatest human freedom. The whole concept of freedom in this country was defined by African Americans, because when this nation was founded, and I hope you know that it was founded by a joint stock company that sent people here looking for gold. That was the reason they were here. Gold. Not religious freedom, gold. There were a few people who came over looking for religious freedom in the Plymouth colony. They were supposed to come to the Virginia colony, and for a while, it was the same. But most of those people ended up turning around and restricting access to other people. And many of their ministers were the biggest promoters of slavery. It is important that we understand this history. It is important that you read about this history, not just listen, because you're going to hear half, you're going to remember half, maybe, of what I've said for the first 10 minutes. And then everything else is a blur. Read it for yourself, and then what I say will resonate and stick with you. I want to give you a little historical background about voting. Oh, by the way, does anyone know the first black person who ran for president of the United States?
Was it a female? Was it a female?
Yes, it was a female. Does anyone know that female's name? You don't get to answer. You're a history professor. Shirley Chisholm was the first person who's black, of color, period, to run for president of the United States. Black women have been at the forefront of championing the rights of African Americans. Yes, black men have also, but black women even more so, because they were not just championing the rights of black people, but black people are not defined by men only. Black people are men and women, and as such, she championed both her rights as a black person and her rights as a woman. And yes, she got beat up, kicked, stomped on, although they didn't do too much of that because Sojourner Truth, whose name, her original name, I should say, not her real name, was Isabel Bonfrey. She renamed herself because she said she would be the teller of truth and that she would make her travels. She would do a sojourn and begin to tell people the truth. And the truth was really kind of encapsulated in her statement during a speech. Ain't I a woman? Because they were talking about how women, and I'm talking about white abolitionists, how women, needed to be protected and blah, blah. And she was like, yeah. Ain't I a woman? She was 6 feet tall. She had men challenge her about being a woman, and one time she showed them. Mm-hmm. I don't need to tell you, right? And she argued that black women were as capable as any man. She had to work in the fields alongside men. Her owner had her chopping wood. By the age of 6, I think, she had 5 owners. Separated from her family when she was just a child, a little baby. She championed that for everyone. Here in Norfolk, we had primarily black men, although there were some women in that audience as well, who pushed the idea that we must have civil rights and civil rights must include voting. And even though there was an 1868 Civil Rights Act, it did not include voting. In fact, most of the states did not allow black people to vote at the state and local level. There were a few places, like in Massachusetts, but no states could allow black people to vote in the federal election because the U.S. Constitution barred that to white men only. And so these residents got national attention. If you can imagine, some of these people were just out of slavery. And they got national attention because of this huge proclamation that they not only wrote and published, but had a big program about just that. We know that the 14th Amendment restored what the Supreme Court took away from black people, which was their right to be recognized as a human being. Do you know that the Dred Scott decision said black people were not humans? They were animals and therefore had no rights that any white person needed to think about or respect. Written by Roger B. Taney, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was also a slaveholder. So they needed the 14th Amendment to restore what the Supreme Court had stripped away, to give citizenship rights, the recognition of being human. So when I hear people pumping up America, always been the nation of the free and the brave, I'm like, please, shut up. Shut up, shut up. Read a book. Read a history textbook that will tell you that's not true. I'll never forget in 2007, with the big 400th commemoration of America's founding, George W. Bush got up in Jamestown Park and said, since 1776, we have all been free. I almost had a stroke that day. I can't tell you the anguish I felt that we had a president who failed to recognize history. They wanted to believe the myth, and they wanted to promote the myth, and they wanted to brainwash our population to believe that myth, and we have a current one today doing the same thing. The 15th Amendment was passed, and white women who were advocating for white female suffrage were pissed that black men got the right to vote. And I'm telling you, it split the women's rights movement in half because of that. But yet there were still black women who refused to back down, and they included Sojourner Truth. I wanted you to see this picture. In 1867, there were a number of delegates, about a fourth of the delegates who were elected to serve in the Virginia Constitutional Convention because Virginia had to rewrite its constitution. They met, they were voted in. The man standing in the center, Willis Hodges, is from Princess Anne County. He was a free black. And when the artist was doing that, the artist chose to center him in this picture. And of course, there was a reason. You know, art has a power. And who you center in that picture communicates whatever your message is, whatever your thesis is. Even though you can see all the white men who were in this convention, but you see a few black people in there. And this drawing was published in the national newspaper. So it circulated around to tell the world that Virginia had changed for a while. But then we saw the emergence at the same time of the Knights of Camellia, the white Knights of Camellia. They all became the Ku Klux Klan. And their mission was to terrorize black people so that they didn't exercise their rights, and definitely not the right to vote. Virginia did a lot of things, putting in reasons why black men couldn't vote. And of course, they were making sure that black men were falsely arrested. How many of you have heard the legend of John Henry? He was a steel driving man. How many of you know John Henry was a real person? And he was arrested for stealing $1,000 worth of goods outside of in a little town outside of Richmond that only had $1,000 worth of goods. So I assume he must have picked the building up and walked away with it. $1,000 was that key element, because $1,000 meant it was a felony. And he was put in the Virginia penitentiary and forced to build the railroads. That's how Virginia started reinitializing slavery in the penal system. It takes only looking at history to know these patterns, these threads, where they started, the rationale, and how it continues. These men who are listed here, they were part of this constitutional convention. They rewrote the Constitution. They stripped all the rights they could from black people. And they initiated the poll tax. So it's hard enough to get people to show up to vote, and they don't have to pay anything. They just have to register to vote and show up. Imagine if you had to pay to vote. How few people would show up. And then there were all kinds of other things, just in case you paid that. The literacy tests, the understanding clause, that's a real hard one. So I'm going to have you read part of the Constitution, and you tell me what that means. And I'm the only one determining whether you have a clear understanding of what it means. See how hard it can be? That's what got initiated. So we saw the black electorate reduced basically to about 10% of the population. And this is just of men. African American women always understood that they would get the real hard end of the stick. They were not only exploited because of their race, but because of their gender. And sexual abuse and sexual assault was a common thing, especially if you were a black woman working as a domestic or in a factory. That was a regular thing. And I'm always amazed when people are shocked when I show them pictures of black people in the 19th and early 20th century, and they're like, wow, there were a lot of light-skinned black people during that time. Yeah, I wonder why. It's called sexual exploitation and abuse. Do you know that Virginia and many of the southern states had a law that said if you threatened a white person, and this is a law that was passed in 1669, I believe. If you seemingly threatened a white person, if you resisted in any way, they could casually kill you. It was called a casual killing act. They could just shoot you. Sounds familiar, maybe? Like if you're threatened, you have a right to shoot somebody? How about that stand your ground law? That law did not go far at all. It just went back into the 17th century and pulled out those kinds of acts that were already passed. So black women had to construct a way forward. And these are some of the women, and I showed another picture of Sojourner Truth. But you had Ida B. Wells, who had to flee Memphis because she dared to write an article talking about 3 of her friends who were very wealthy, successful grocers who were lynched by the Klan, and they accused them of raping white women. And she wrote an article challenging that, and the Klan said, "We're coming for you." And her friends had to get her out of Memphis very quickly. But that did not stop her mouth, nor did it stop her pen from writing, and she continued to publish article after article about racist voter suppression, the activities of the Klan, because this was considered the nadir, where there were so many black people, men and women, who were lynched by the Klan. Everybody knew who they were. They even printed postcards and sent them in the mail saying, "I killed this person. What do you think, mama?" So they admitted their crimes, and it became a federal crime. Why? Because they sent it through the mail. And yet none of them were punished. We had Mary Church Terrell, who actually came from a very wealthy black family. In fact, her family was one of the first black millionaires in the country. And she invested her entire life pushing for civil rights and for voter rights. She's the one who helped to organize the Women's Club movement, the Colored Women's Club, which were national movements, all about galvanizing your power. Now, keep in mind, women didn't get the right to vote until 1920. But guess what many of them had? They had husbands, they had fathers, they had brothers, they had male friends, and they did what women had done since the 19th century. They marched with their husbands, fathers, friends, brothers, to the voting polls to hear who they voted for. Now, if I know who you voted for and you didn't vote for who I wanted, what will happen to you when you got home? And there is only one thing men want when they're married. Say that again.
A happy wife.
Yes. You all heard happy wife, happy life? She will make your life a living hell if you voted for the wrong person. And we know this is the strategy. And so Mary Church Terrell and these others were very much involved. I'm being a little light about some things, but also very serious. Because you need that kind of pressure. All right, I didn't do that. Okay. This is just one of many pictures of black suffragettes who were rejected by most of the white suffragettes, but they still showed up and marched with them and forced their way to the front of the line because the white women wanted to push them to the back and they refused. And what does that tell you? Don't let anybody tell you where you belong. And that was their theme. No one is going to tell us where we belong. Now, I've written a couple of articles about the National Council of Negro Women, focusing particularly on Vivian Carter Mason, who was the third president. Mary McLeod Bethune, who's right here in the center, was a very powerful woman that no one knows about today. She was the second most powerful woman in the country before she died. The second most powerful woman in the country before she died. And the most powerful woman in the country at that time. And yet we know about Eleanor Roosevelt, but we do not know about Mary McLeod Bethune, who started this organization that had over 500,000 members throughout the country. And they had a plan. They were the ones who planned school integration. They were the ones who planned what needed to happen for the civil rights movement. They were the ones. I've seen some of their plans from the 1940s, before the modern civil rights movement began. Because they understood, many of them were professionals, social workers. Vivian Carter Mason, for example, was in charge of the Brooklyn division of the welfare office in the city of New York in the 1930s. She had more people that she supervised than anybody else in their entire division, because she was a trained social worker, a master's degree from the University of Chicago. These women, some of them were attorneys, some of the second president of the National Council of Negro Women, she had roots in Norfolk. She's actually buried in the Berkeley section of Norfolk. Farabee. Dorothy, thank you. Blanked on the first name. Dorothy Farabee. She was a physician who would take her other colleagues who were physicians to Mississippi every year so that she would provide health care to black women who didn't have access. So these women were about strategies and changing things, and they, of course, emerged after black women could vote, but during the time that the federal and state governments and local governments did everything they could to stop people from voting, including intimidation. In fact, one of the black men, the first black man who was registered to vote after Reconstruction in Mississippi, was shot dead on the steps of City Hall as he was trying to register in broad daylight. And the person who shot him was never arrested. So Vivian Carter Mason, I like this particular quote because I think it symbolizes what black women in general did, but blacks in general did. She said, "You must try to be a rebel." And you say, why are you asking to be a rebel? You know, we talk a lot about rebels, and even the Confederacy talked about the rebel cause and the rebel yell and all of this. But we tell people, we tell our children, we don't want you to be a rebel. But she says, no, you have to try to be one. Anyone who sees the inequities of our time and the slowness of change must not think it rebelling a terrible thing, but see it as his duty. Even authority should be rebelled against when it is wrong. Now, you may think she's the first one who said it, but she didn't. Enlightenment writers from Europe said that first. And then it was reiterated by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. But if you're hearing this for the first time, I challenge you to go back and read it yourself. Because when you talk about rebellion against a force that's evil, what you're doing may be seen by them as illegal, but it is necessary to invoke change. And that was her philosophy. In fact, she was the one who came up with the Norfolk 17 strategy and oversaw a lot of that here in Norfolk. She, as I said, was part of this cadre of black women who wanted to change the world. And this is just a picture of one of many that was initiated by the National Council. This group was in San Francisco in 1956, where they were really pushing this notion of vote. Vote. I sound like Obama right now. Don't get mad. Well, you all missed out. Don't get mad. Thank you. A few of you heard me. All right. All right, I'm going to sit down and let my colleague Charles Ford tell us a little bit about some of the changes that happened later.
And some of the changes here in Norfolk really took local people, both men and women. Certainly a woman very different than Doreen Carter Macer in terms of social class education. Evelyn Butts, seamstress, really a working class person, everyday person, changed history here by joining and teaming up with civil rights attorney Joseph Jordan. And Joseph Jordan is right here. Next one. Oops. And Joseph Jordan really played an important role not only in voting rights, but also in public school desegregation, in attaining all kinds of rights, human rights on a general level, not just voting rights. And he had a real struggle in his own life. He was wounded right after World War II in a landmine explosion in Strasbourg, France. And that certainly gave him the determination to overcome that disability and terrible injury, to dedicate his life to making things better for other people, including, of course, local African Americans. So Evelyn Butts, her husband was also wounded in World War II, and that's how they came together as World War II veterans. And World War II veterans certainly had a determination to make life better because they had seen things that were so terrible. And so that kind of crucible gave these two people, the seamstress and the counselor I talk about in the book, the determination and wherewithal to fight against this terrible injustice and this oppression. And the poll tax, I mean, it sounds very, $1.50, we could do that, right? But they made it so difficult to pay the $1.50 because the form they had that would accompany your payment was blank. So you had to make it up yourself and figure out what they wanted, and then go to the registrar, and they have another blank form. And so if you missed your phone number, or you missed your mother's maiden name, or whatever the registrar was looking for that day, tough. Even though we had the $1.50, right? And by the way, the $1.50 would also disenfranchise many poor whites too. And there was an effort during the Byrd machine when African Americans were restricted down to 10%. There was an effort to get rid of the poll tax, but the people in power did not want that to happen. I mean, they wanted as few people voting as possible. For example, in the 1958 senatorial election, 3% of eligible voters voted. 3%. I mean, that's really bad. So that's what they were up against. Terrible. Let's see. And again, you can see the power here of this picture, right? Again, fighting for all, Joe Jordan. And Joe Jordan would fight with two other lawyers, Len Holt and Dolly, and they fought not only for voting rights here, but for rights all over the country. And for that, their law office on Brambleton Avenue was raided and attacked by the General Assembly, who sent armed vigilantes, basically. Not even policemen, but vigilantes they just hired off the street, right, like ICE, basically, to harass and attack their office, right? which is, by the way, where the former post office was on Church and Brambleton, right? So very close by here. That was in 1961. And his law office, there's some more lawyers here working for equality, including Victor Ashe and J. Hugo Madison, important in Norfolk State's history. Here they're fighting for desegregation of the schools, right? But unlike other NAACP lawyers, Judge Jordan believed in direct action, protests, all kinds of strategies, and not just the courtroom, right? So that made him a triple threat in some ways to the established order, who were more used to the more staid court orders that very go through the judicial system. It could take a long time. But direct action could also stimulate action by legislators even more quickly, right? And get attention. And of course, in the TV age, Evelyn Butts and Judge Jordan would protest not only voting rights, but also at the local Belo, which is on Princess Anne Road. It's now on a Piggly Wiggly, right? Well, at one time, believe it or not, that store refused to hire African Americans, and so they had this huge protest in the parking lot there, which is still there, which is very close here again to the campus of Norfolk State. And so again, this is part of this rallying, not just in the courtroom, we're trying to get through courts, but also, or legislators, but direct rallies and big, events to draw attention to voting, get people voting and getting them maybe adhering to the poll tax and trying to do all that stuff, but also trying to get rid of it too, right? At the same time. So it was a double-pronged strategy, right? Of complying with the law, which was so crazy, beginning would change, every registrar. In fact, if you paid and you did all that stuff, they might just close down the office that day and say, too bad, right? We don't want you there. And one of the things that Judge Jordan was involved with, which also involved Norfolk's own history and its own self-image as the all-American city that had all veterans and at least on the naval bases, integration and everything else. And this award ceremony for the all-American city included look at voting rights. And he said, well, wait a minute, you're lying about this, right? And he had this idea of, Norfolk got this award, the All-American City, and at the All-American City award ceremony, which would be the municipal auditorium, which is where Scope is now, not one African American was invited, right, but to the All-American City. Let's see, next one. And fighting for rights, your voting rights, you had a whole host of people that, again, were tied to the local law firm of Jordan Doley Holtz, right? And these are people fighting all over, but based here in Hampton Roads, right? So Hampton Roads really was that important in that sense. And here is Evelyn Butts, right? Who went on to become a candidate for city council. She was, she had all kinds of power into the 1970s and 80s. But again, just an ordinary person with not a University of Chicago education like the Carter Mason, but certainly one who changed national history, right? And the two of them would use an argument based on race and based on the 14th Amendment, saying that, again, these poll taxes and everything disproportionately discriminated against African Americans by race, and that was made illegal by the 14th Amendment. Previous attempts to get rid of the poll tax relied on the 15th Amendment, right? And had the class idea that this also affects poor whites, so it's just not African Americans, so it's more of an inclusive argument. That actually didn't work. That argument didn't work either in Virginia or in the Supreme Court, but what did work would be the use of the 14th Amendment, right? And the 14th Amendment has been used to expand all kinds of rights for all kinds of people ever since. But this was the first one to get rid of the state and local poll taxes. In 1964, the federal poll tax had been got rid of by an amendment, but there was still this idea of paying to vote locally and state. And that was finally gotten rid of, finally, by Joe Jordan and Ellen Buck. And there they are together. Again, the counselor and the seamstress, right? And it's interesting how their futures sort of diverged. Joe Jordan became sort of kind of a socially conservative law and order judge in the 1980s, from being a civil rights advocate earlier, right? Became part of the establishment here in Norfolk. First city councilman since, African-American city councilman in Norfolk since 1968. And then again, kind of a strict judge, right, in terms of law and order. Evelyn Butts tried to go for higher offices. She tried to support some of the white establishment, believe it or not, in their attempt to deny ward voting, at-large voting. She went for that. And for that, she got stabbed in the back, basically, and not supported by her more conservative white supporters, right? So it was this Shakespearean tragedy, it was called by the press here. Kind of ironies and inconsistencies, but both of them, you can't deny their accomplishment, right? Of this landmark, right? Supreme Court decision, right? That still stands today and sees a template for expanding the rights of everybody from now on, right? And even the current Supreme Court really can't, I don't think, bring down that precedent, right? Even with voting ID, they're going to try to. Voting ID, of course, is seen as a poll tax, right? Because you have to pay to get your driver's license. You have to pay for a passport. And well, what if you don't need a car? Or you don't have a car? You can't afford one? Well, then you can't vote, right? That's the whole thing. And that idea would be taken away by the 1966 Supreme Court decision, right? It's obviously illegal to do that, but they're going to try anyway, right? Because the current Supreme Court has been very, very insistent on getting rid of precedents and things that were decided before, right? Many years before, like Roe v. Wade. So stay tuned on that, because that's another discussion coming up. And we'll highlight, I think, the power of that 1966 decision that came out of Hampton Roads, basically, right? Which is really extraordinary, right? And again, it shows Hampton Roads' importance in the civil rights movement. It's just not all about Birmingham or Selma or, Norfolk and Hampton Roads. Here again, this is a bit later. I think that's Mayor Ward, our former chairman. History department here, and also Mayor of Chesapeake. And see part of the establishment by that time. That was his book in the 1980s, We Can Make It Together. And again, emphasizing, return to traditional values, even though in the age of equality and liberty at that time. And our book is called Black Citizens in American Democracy. Dr. Newman Alexander and myself have contributions in that book. It came out in 2025, last year, from the University of Florida Press. And of course, we know anything about Florida, how the politics there are. So that was a real accomplishment, getting it out. And this is a whole other story. But we all have other things too here. Charlene Butts Ligon, that's another great work, Fearless, looking at again how a poor seamstress took on Jim Crow. An excellent book. She's been here too. Myself and Dr. Littlejohn, my research partner, we wrote Elusive Equality about 15 years ago, and it looks at Norfolk's struggles with equity in education. And then we also have Ella Baker and the Black Freedom Movement by Barbara Ransby. Again, excellent. Ella Baker was from Norfolk, right? And again, ventured a lot of young people to join the freedom movement. So So all of these things, of course, you read them, right? They're available in our library, I believe, all of them, except, of course, Black Citizens and American Democracy. We have to get our dean to order one, maybe from the library. Next. Otherwise, I think they're all there for you to read. So without further ado, we have more questions for you.
Thank you. All right, landscape, please. All right, thank you. Great. What is the least controversial way to get people to talk about voting in the Gen Z era without arguing?
I think the least controversial way is not to focus on who they're going to vote for, but the fact that they should vote, and that their rights and privileges as a citizen is dependent upon the exercise of that right. And for those of you who don't know, I remember calling my congressional representatives a number of times. And when I call, I say, and as you can see, I vote in every election. Their response was, yes, I do see that. So if you call and you're not a regular voter, they know. And regardless of whether you have supported their person, which they don't know for sure, they just know you voted. But if you're a regular voter, you are actually much more of a threat than if you never vote. And so I think focusing on that and why that matters allows you to talk about reality, not preferences.
Yeah, and again, just knowing the history and the value and the legacy of the fights, the battles, the ordinary people, like Ellen Bunce and Judge Jordan, who, it was unlikely in some ways people to stand up, and they did, despite all kinds of obstacles, right? They did so. So knowing that their struggle, I think, would propel people to do it rather than seeing it as something coming from top down or somewhere else.
Okay, to piggyback off of Elijah's question, what would you say to someone who doesn't believe in the power of voting to get them to see a different perspective? Because like with the Electoral College and things like that, a lot of people use the argument that even if I do vote, it could still go a different way because it's in the hands of somebody else.
Thank you for that question. I don't know about you, but I get that a lot, that people are saying, well, the Electoral College, and I said, what election is controlled by the Electoral College? There's one. One out of hundreds of elections. And you're focused on one. I said, so you're looking for an excuse not to vote. I said, but regardless of that, the Electoral College tradition is that they are influenced by the popular vote for each of the different states. Having said that, there's a thing called direct election. And that direct election, sometimes in Virginia, has been decided by one vote. One vote. One vote determined who was in charge of our legislature, whether it was the Democrats or Republicans. One vote. And so when I get people who tell me their vote doesn't matter, I tell them, okay, so you haven't been paying attention because one vote has decided elections. I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Could you just explain, the importance of zoning when it comes to voting? The importance of zoning?
Yeah, redistricting. You want to start with that since
Well, yeah, redistricting and gerrymandering is a long history to deny people the right to vote. And certainly in the Jim Crow era, they preferred these more obvious, explicit denials, rather than this sort of, it looks very neutral, except that when you start looking at the map and the geography, the culture, how to string together various things to deny people, really the proportionate power they have, maybe not their individual right, but their proportional power as a community to express themselves. That's a long history. And apparently it's coming back into style, and it's being done without the kind of academic or scholarly gloss, that is done in your face right now.
And that's because of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that you can use, you can't use race as a determiner when you are deciding what regions you're in, what voting districts you're in, but you can't use politics. And our politics is strongly influenced by race. So that's their little way to get around what people are doing. In local politics, you used to have ward voting, and they got rid of ward voting for a long time because too many black people were getting elected in predominantly black wards. Then they went to at-large voting to diffuse that vote so that black people would not be able to get their representatives representing them. In gerrymandering, just a little while ago, Virginia had a district gerrymandered, and Jim Kiggins won after they gerrymandered it because they took out all kinds of Democratic voters and skewed it so that it dominated in the Republican areas. And they did that in a few of the districts. So they did it, the courts did it, by the way, because the courts leaned right. I guess you're my right here. They leaned right. And so they gerrymandered those districts to favor the Republicans, even though they weren't supposed to. And so these kinds of things have been used to not restrict your voting ability, but the power of your vote. And that is why, if you don't vote, you have nothing to complain about. Absolutely nothing. Because not voting means you gave your vote to someone else. And personally, I'm selfish when it comes to that. I'm one of those selfish, evil little buggers that I talk about with human beings. I don't want anybody to have power over me like that. I know you can't avoid it to some degree, but when you don't vote, you give other people the decision-making power to decide how much you pay in taxes, where you can live, whether your district is protected. Because I'm hearing today our president coming up with all kinds of false rationales for not providing FEMA support or Medicaid support to areas with some false accusation about corruption. When there's more corruption in red states than in blue states. And by the way, blue states provide 2/3, I think, of the revenue in this country. And yet they're getting far less than their fair share. I know there's one more question, and then we have to let you all go. Young man, you have your hand raised back there.
What do you think is the biggest misconception Gen Z has about elections?
All right, Dr. Ford, you want to answer that question? Does everyone hear that question?
Well, there's an idea that they're irrelevant, that the wealthy or billionaires will control anyway. But that's not the case. Even in the Gilded Age, people would vote, actually at a higher rate than they do now. And they withstood that power. They limited that power of very wealthy corporations. The idea that both political parties are the same, or all political parties are the same, they're all out for power, and not to represent people. That's not true. That's not true. They're not all the same.
And I'll add this. If you are a Gen Zer, get off of social media, please. If you want news, go to some of these newspapers, news sources that provide a balanced view. PBS is one of them. And we have a public radio station called what?
Hot 91. Ooh.
Yes, Hot 91,
NSB.
Thank you.
Must be in the morning.
You know, so go to those locations, go to those sources to get your news. Social media is not a source for real news. Every now and then it will disseminate some real news, but it's designed to influence. It is not designed to communicate facts. It's designed to influence your choices. And so if anything, be smart about where you get your information. Read. I cannot emphasize that enough. Because social media, and I don't know if you've seen some of the recent studies, and get off of weed if you're on weed too, because that's killing you. It is seriously killing you. Almost as bad as tobacco, but it is killing you. I'm telling you, it's hurting your heart, it's hurting your brain, it's hurting your liver, it's hurting your lungs. Get off of that stuff. I know I'm in danger zone saying that, but I'm going to keep saying that because I'm tired of seeing young people dying from diseases that have a direct connection to that stuff, because it is not healthy for you, and especially if you're always high. So get off of that. Find some books. You know, the reason you're in college is so you can be exposed to this knowledge. Use that exposure to read yourself and to find out more. And every single book has a long bibliography. And yes, I know you can go down a lot of rabbit holes that way. But you know the reason why President Obama walks the way he does? I can't quite do it, but you know, he's got that because he is knowledgeable. He's confident. And you can't fake confidence, but you sure can fake whether you're smart temporarily. But you know, people who have nothing in their brains, they look like they're about to blow away. As you know, heads filled with nothing. People who are smart, intelligent, well-read, you can see it in their eyes. You can see whether there is thought, analysis, doubt about what you're saying, because you want them to doubt it. You want them to find out for themselves. That's what we do as educators. We expose you and challenge you. And without that, you don't become the people we can brag about. Because at the end of the day, we want to brag about all of you. And I do. I have students who are partners in law firms. They are educators. They're PhDs in different fields. They are news reporters. I mean, I brag about my babies all the time. And that's what we want for you. But the first step is knowledge. And that comes from reading. And I know I've gone far afield of your question. That's what happens when you ask your faculty members for that. But please, 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 look at these sources, read for yourself, get off of social media. That's the place to have fun. That's not the place to learn. Knowledge is not communicated through social media, not that kind of knowledge. And at the end of the day, you want to be a well-rounded citizen who knows how to make good choices for yourself. And that requires that you study what's going on, you listen to the news, you read about it, and you do your own research. And while that may sound hard, it really is not, because when I see people on social media almost 24/7, your brain has to be a puddle by the end. So use that incredible brain that you have to learn more. And if I hear anybody sounding like talk radio, I tell them about it, or the podcasts that are out, because I can always tell when they've been listening to too many podcasts. So if you ever have me as a professor and I say, can I get that podcast out of your mouth? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Because too many people listen to one person and trust that that person knows what they're talking about. Intelligent, well-educated people always put a question mark beside everything they hear, and then they go and find out for themselves if that's true. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming and staying as long as you stayed, and I hope that you will consider, we have a program on March 25th, you'll hear about it, and it's a highway equity study that shows you how VDOT has been consistently discriminating against African American communities forever, and what is being done to redress those issues. Thank you all so much.
Okay, it's Slim Overton here, and I'm here at Norfolk State, and you have just enjoyed a very I'll say entertaining and informative program with Cassandra Newby Alexander. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. And I'm here with the director of museums, and he can give his name and his title, and I have a question for him.
So also an Alexander, but Alexander Benitez.
Oh, okay.
And I'm the director for the Department of Museums and Tourism for the city of Portsmouth.
Okay, thanks. And we're here at Norfolk State, and one of the sponsors of this program is the City of Portsmouth Museums Department. And how important is it for us to go outside of Portsmouth and come on the campus of Norfolk State University and have programs like this, especially during this month and all year round?
Absolutely. So for us, this is an opportunity to take some of the programming that we've been doing, in Portsmouth, and inviting people to Portsmouth to listen to become a little more educated about some of the topics that we bring. And this is really an opportunity for us to take it out into the community. We thought it was important to bring it to a community like the university, Norfolk State, where the students here can benefit from some of the programming that we do. We'd like to continue. This is our first presentation off-site, off-campus, and outside the city of Portsmouth, but our series, Black History Now, the idea behind it is that we talk about Black history for 5 months out of the year instead of the 1 month that we celebrate and talk about Black History Month. So the idea is that these conversations are ongoing, and there are a multitude of topics that we can talk about. So today the topic on voting is absolutely pertinent, and I think it's extremely relevant to students, especially who, we had some fantastic questions today about voting and disillusionment about surrounding voting and how do we get people to vote. That's exactly the kind of conversation that is different than maybe the conversations we might have in Portsmouth when we do it on a Saturday, right, or regular programming. So that for us, that's also part of it. Is the communities are different, and so if we can get out to the different communities where the questions are different, where the information resonates a little bit differently, I think it's just as important as trying to get everybody to our museums to appreciate what Portsmouth has as well on site.
Yes, and it's certainly important to come over here with our young students.
Yes.
That are our future.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
We really appreciate you coming out, and it was nice participation of the students, and they had questions. And do you believe, like me, it's a direct correlation between young people or people in general knowing their history, and it also sort of helps them understand what's going on today and the importance of voting today, because history does repeat itself.
Absolutely, and I think that's what's forgotten, right, is that what we heard today was their patterns repeated, and so remembering that that they're empowered to make change and help make decisions, and that their vote matters. I think it really was quite something to see the conversation, the discussion after the actual talk as well.
Yes, indeed.
You could tell that these students are actually motivated, and they're interested, and they're engaged. And that was great to see.
Yes, indeed. So thanks a lot for doing what you do, and hopefully we can see some things like this happen in the future.
Absolutely.
And make sure, anybody watching, make sure you come to the city of Portsmouth. And
can I give you a
go ahead.
Website address?
Sure, go ahead.
blkhistorynow.com is our website.
Yes, go to that website and check out all the different activities.
We got a lot of programming coming up.
A lot of programming coming up, and you don't want to miss out on it, especially that Children's Museum.
That's right.
All right, thanks a lot. I appreciate it, sir. Take care.